We are on the last set of our help videos for Chapter 5. It's going to be covering sections 512 and 513. We are going to look specifically at refactoring code, abstraction of code, and something called casting. Refactoring, as you have already used and learned, is how you take your code and make it more readable. We are going to be creating an add score method to do that. Abstraction is the ability to use one method for multiple purposes. That's actually an example. Abstraction also hides the details of the implementation to make it easier to code. An example of that would be in your code that you've seen several times, like for example generating a random number. You have no idea how that is implemented, but you know how to use it. So the details for a random number generation are hidden from you. We are going to begin in the white cell class, where we created a scoring mechanism, and we used the idea that we wanted to take the current score and add 20 to it. I am going to create an add score method that we are going to then move from the white cell class here to the world class. But I'm going to first create it locally, and then we are going to implement it on a larger scale. I went ahead and created the method. It's private void add score. It has no arguments here or parameters yet, and its only job is to add 20 right now to the scoring mechanism. And so after I refactored the code and created a method for it, remember that I need to now call the method in the appropriate place. So within our check collision method, I added the method call to add score right here. That means that these lines of code here are no longer going to be needed, so I can delete them, and then I just need to add or call my add score method, and it should run the same that it did before. And if I test it real quick, we will find that it does run like it did before. If I catch a virus, it does take this score right here and adds to it, even though I died right away. So if I reset that. Now, one thing that might make it a little bit more interesting is depending upon how many viruses, or the idea is actually that we maybe will make the game a little bit more user-friendly by expanding it to not just the white cell class, but maybe something happens with bacteria or something happens with viruses with the scoring. I can add a value in here. For example, I could add an argument here that I'm going to pass in, which means then in my add score class, I need to create a local variable, and I'm just going to call it the amount that I'm going to add, which would then also change this variable or value here. For the purposes of what we're doing right now, it's not going to change anything that happens on the screen. If I run this, I'm still going to be adding 20 because I'm passing in the value of 20, but I've now increased the flexibility of this method because now I can take in any amount that I want. When I go to run the program, as I said, it's not going to change anything about how it runs. When I catch a virus, it'll add 20, but now it makes that method more flexible. One major issue, though, is even though that method is more flexible, this method is only available in the white cell class, and that's where we're going to move and expand and make it more accessible by moving this method to the world class. Just to reference your textbook, it is here on page 95 that they talk about this, and they talk about the idea of maybe creating some different scoring rules, which you will implement some of them. But it also talks about the fact that that method is only available in white cell, and so if we try to access it outside of white cell, we're not going to be able to do that. And so the next few things that I'm going to do, I'm going to move it to the world class, and we will see what happens. So if I go back to our Greenfoot code, I'm going to basically repeat what I did here, where I created an instance field. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to copy it to the bloodstream class in order to, which is a world. So I'm going to create an instance field here. And if I toggle, I'm going to be toggling back and forth between white cell and bloodstream. In white cell, we also initialize that value to 0 within our constructor. So back in the bloodstream class, I already have a constructor here. Remember, a constructor is named the same as the class, but I want to initialize this score variable to 0 here. It's not required necessarily, but it's very good programming practices, and you will see professionals do that. And if you don't do that, it's just considered bad practice not to initialize your instance fields. And then lastly, we're going to take the method that we wrote in white cell here, and we are going to bring it over to our bloodstream class. And I'm going to just create and add in. I'm going to add it right here at the beginning so we have access to it. It doesn't matter where it goes as long as it's have your constructor first, and then all the other methods can be added. So it's really just a matter of copying and pasting. So setting up the instance field, initializing the value, and then adding the add score method here. But there are a few things that we have to actually do in order to be able to access it. If I come back here and look at this class, please notice that the access specifier was private because I was only accessing this method within the white cell class. Well, now I'm going to actually delete that out because I want to access the add score method from a different class. And the score is going to be kept for the entire game, not just for a white cell. So what that does is it actually takes away my scoring variable from this class. And because I don't have anything else in my constructor, I could delete the whole entire constructor. I could leave it. It's not going to do anything, but I could delete that constructor, or I can leave it like that. There's just not going to be anything that happens. Just in case I want to do something later, I might leave it. But now I'm going to try to call this add score method, and it is not going to like it. It says it cannot find this symbol, method add score int. The reason it cannot find that symbol is because I just deleted all the code. I need to tell it that it really needs to use a world add score because I moved the add score method out here to the world. I moved it to a specific world, and that was the bloodstream. And so I somehow have to tell the computer that I'm working with a bloodstream add score. And in order to do that, I'm going to use something called casting. I'm going to switch to the textbook and show you the pages there, and then we will come back and do that. In your textbook on page 99, it gives an example of what we are going to try to do. And the problem that we need to deal with is when we're working in the individual classes like white cell and bacteria, it doesn't know that it's a bloodstream object that you're working with. So we need to create a bloodstream object, and we need to do what's called casting, which happens right here. I'm going to be getting the world that I'm working with. The current world that I'm working with is of type bloodstream. And so I have to tell the computer that I need to use a bloodstream get or object, and then I assign it to this variable. And this is a naming convention here where capital bloodstream is the class, lowercase bloodstream is the individual or particular object I'm dealing with right now. And then you can see how they use that bloodstream object and they add the score to it. And so that's why we moved the add score method to the bloodstream world, so then we could use it in multiple classes. So here it looks like I could change it, the scoring to be and subtract something if I hit a virus, add something if I capture a bacteria, and etc. So let's go back to the code and see how we're going to implement this. In white cell, I can no longer just access add score. When I compiled it, I got a message that it didn't recognize that. And so I know that my add score method is in the bloodstream class. And so I'm going to create a bloodstream variable here. And it's going to be my current world. So I could just try to do get world. But it's not going to like that because it's incompatible. And so I'm trying to assign the current world to a type of bloodstream, so I have to do what's called casting. So I'm going to change the world from a more generic world to the particular bloodstream world that I'm working with when I hit compile. That should work. Now it goes on and says it doesn't recognize this method because I haven't told it to use the world bloodstream to access that method. Remember, if a method is outside the class, I have to use a dot operator with it. So I'm going to use bloodstream dot add score 20. Try to compile again. And now it is yelling at me because I'm trying to use the score variable here. I'm just going to comment that out. And if you remember, I deleted the score variable because we moved that all to the bloodstream class. Compiles without any syntax errors. However, if I want this to be printed like it was, I now have to move this to an appropriate place. Because every time we change a score, we're probably going to want to record that score on the screen. I'm going to take this line of code and I'm going to move it to our bloodstream class. So I'm in the bloodstream class and I'm going to go to our add score method and I'm going to then show text. At this point, because I'm already in a world, I don't believe we don't need to use the get world. So it's trying to find a world, but it's already in a world. So I no longer need this because I'm going to actually call that method from within this class. So if I hit delete there and compile, there should be no syntax errors. There may or may not be some other errors. We're going to see if this will run as we think it should. See if I can keep from dying, and I can't. So we're going to reset and run again. See if I can capture. This is not my lucky day. All I want to do is capture a couple viruses. And I don't have the move forward coded into this, so I can't move forward right now. And there's a lot of things that aren't coded into this example, but I'm just emphasizing the scoring. So score is 20. Let's see if my score will add a few more, 40, etc. And so that part is working. If I go back and look at bloodstream then, just to kind of review what we changed. We added a instance field here. We set it to 0. We added a add score method, and there was actually one other error message that showed up that I changed while I was moving the screens around, and that was this. We had started at private, and if I tried to use that method from in white blood cell when it's private, let me hit compile, it's going to say add score int has private access, and we can't access it. So I had changed the access specifier here to public, and I'm going to also auto layout so it fixes, and I am going to then also so making that public rather than private should allow access to everything, and that's what you saw here. I'm going to compile that again. We moved that, so everything should be in working order. If I go back to the PowerPoint to review what we did real quick, we just did the following. We refactored code by adding an add score method, and we moved it to the world, bloodstream world, and that makes it more accessible to multiple actor classes. So we moved it to the bloodstream class, which happens to be a world class. And then that's going to make it accessible by multiple actors. And then we also did casting. We told the compiler which type of object we were using, and this is often used to create a local variable of a particular type when we need to use it. So we created a local variable of bloodstream. Now when I go back to my game, it's possible I can add a scoring mechanism for something to happen with bacteria, a scoring mechanism within viruses if I want, and I believe that's what they're going to have you do in one of the exercises. That should conclude this video.